Okay, welcome to our Grape wine bottle holder. It's a leaning wine bottle holder. You just plop that wine bottle in there. Don't show our label, and then your wine glasses just hold right on top of there. So this is a fun, loose project. It's very, very, very textured. Lots of fun things going on. We have excellent background effects, so I hope you enjoy the project. To achieve the cracked finish that you see on the project, we're going to use the Chapman's beeswax, and we're going to use a palette knife. I'm going to put some on my palette just because scooping it out is a little bit tougher than I'm wanting to play. Alright, that way I can just get at what I want. I'm going to scoop it up on the edge of my palette, and I'm going to just decide, based on the picture, where I want this wax. I want to make it thick enough to have some body. I don't want it to be invisible. I want it irregular. I want this to simulate the appearance of chipped, peeling, flaking paint. And it does a really awesome job of doing like a really irregular edge. You just have to have it on thick enough. What we're going to do is we're going to heat this with a blow dryer and then wipe the paint back off. So we're using this as a resist. We don't want these to be circles. We want to really, really, really do an irregular thing. Okay, that can sneak on into that circle right there. Don't do too much. You don't want to make it look like it's got some kind of disease. Compare up here. Okay, so this is kind of crawling down. This is great on clocks, which is when I thought of doing it. We'll bring that up just to carry the eye in. Like I said, thick enough. Ignore my red edges that you're seeing there. This was base coated for a different project, and I had to put it in service for this. Alright, so I've got my wax, and now I can go ahead and place my paint. This beeswax is fantastic for a final finish on your projects. If you use it over tin, most of you know how tin chips and peels and cracks and stuff like that. After you're done varnishing your tin, just wipe on, use the directions on here, wipe on some of this wax and then wipe it off, and it will keep and prevent your tin from chipping and cracking, as long as all things are equal as far as prep and stuff like that. Okay, so then from there we're going to take bleach sand and antique white. We're going to mix them to create the base color, and maybe a little bit more of antique white. So maybe like 2 to 1 or maybe 3 to 1 approximately. Get it to be a color that you like, that matches what you've got going on. Okay, now the deal with this is we don't want to play in this wax. The wax is definitely a no playing, no. So what we want is a big brush. Let me wipe out my big brush. Okay, we need a big oval type brush so we don't get brush marks. On the wax area, I want to just kind of lay that onto the edges. I don't want to play and move the wax around. Okay, so kind of thickish, doesn't matter. And then from there, we're going to smooth it out. Okay, and then we'll base coat as usual, just staying out of the wax and not making it peel. So that may not base all in one coat, so I'll just have to come back and do a second coat, and then just be careful not to play in my wax. Notice I didn't worry about covering the center of that bundle of wax right there. I just need to get it to the edges. It'll be easier if you don't have a whole bunch of stuff junked on there. And then smooth out the edges. Notice that when I'm doing this, my brush is not straight up and down as I'm doing this. I'm laying my brush down to be able to get a tender, gentle stroke. For those of you who are new to our website, there's tons and tons of videos like this everywhere on products and on Toll TV and stuff like that. So snoop around, give us a call if you can't find things or if you want to know the location. We're working on a video map. Okay, so we're just going to smooth and then go ahead and apply the base coat. Not worrying about it being pretty just yet. I've got one more coat to do. We'll allow this to dry. Please don't heat set this because your wax will melt and you'll be jumping the gun. Okay, and treat the rest of the surface as you normally would. Okay, now I've got to make some noise, and I just want to show, but I don't really need to show. I've got my blow dryer here. I'm going to heat this until I start seeing the wax kind of get soft, liquidy, and bubbly a little bit. I'm not heating it to boil it, but I want it to liquefy. Okay, and then I've got to have a soft, very absorbent paper towel handy in order to wipe up the mess. I'm going to turn the camcorder off because of the noise, and then I'll re-put it on when I'm wiping it off, okay? Okay, let's get in close, and I think you'll be able to see that it's shiny. Okay, can you see it? Can you see it? Anyway, it's liquidy and shiny right there, so I'm going to now take that, and I'm going to just wipe it off towards the center area. And because my paint is hot, it's going to want to do a little peeling action all by itself. I'm going to just make that irregular, and then I'll continue to do my other sections. But see how nice, let's see how close we can get in there. See how nice and absolutely jiggity-jaggedy those lines are. I don't think I could have faked that. So now I'm going to heat up the rest of my spots, wipe them off, and then I'll show you how we treat this so that we don't have any problems for painting over it. Okay, so I have all of my chipped places all wiped off, but now what I have is a waxy residue. So if wax makes a resist with paint and you have a waxy residue, then obviously your paint isn't going to stick to that. A good test is to take your brush and just wash water over it and watch it bead up. Okay, so that means we have a waxy problem. So you can't just wipe it with water. So what I've done is I want something that will de-grease or de-waxify. Okay, so what I have is I have wet ones that are citrus scented antibacterial. Antibacterial pretty much means it's got alcohol in it. And so because this is just a nice saturated little pad, it just makes a perfect degreaser as well. Can wipe it over the whole thing if I want to, even it out. Oops. Careful on those rougher edges. I should have spent a little bit more time sanding maybe. You don't want to rub so long that you get paint color off of this. Okay, I'm not pulling paint. And what we'll do in a second is we'll test for whether or not we manage to get all the waxy residue off. Anywhere where you were rubbing on it, you need to allow it to get cleaned up. Pull off all your fluffs. These wet wipes, if they're not alcohol-y enough, what you can do is you can dump a little extra alcohol, rubbing alcohol, into them. All right, so now I'll take my brush again. This is such an easy little test. And a little bit of waxy residue, but just about there. So I'm going to give it one more wipe down, and okay, switch to the other side. You spend a little bit longer. We'll just assume that they're all in equal state of unperfected wax removalness. And perfect. Okay. So now I've got this nice and chipped and yucky looking. I want to do a little bit more with a little bit more to my background because I want this to be a really aged, funky kind of strange background. I don't know what you'd call it, like a faux old finish. Alright, I want to use a stencil as part of my background, and I've got the scroll stencil out. It's from our website, and I've got it covered with repositionable stencil adhesive. Now I do want to warn you that stencil adhesive, or the repositionable stencil adhesive, on these more loose without having a ton of these bridges. On the looser ones, you're going to want to make sure that you blot it off on your clothing. Okay, so on something that's going to make it less tacky so that you preserve this tender detail. And so you just do that until you like how untacky it is. And it'll still stick very well, but I mean, this has been on here for, you know, like weeks. Anyway, so I'm going to do that a little bit more on my skirt here. And what I just found out, which is kind of fun, this is a fantastic lint remover. So if you need a lint remover, this is your guy. All right, I want to put some stuff down here. So what I'm going to do is get just a little slightly darker color. I'm going to go with the antique white. Okay, got out a makeup, a triangular makeup applicator. And then what I'm going to do is just tap on. Now this color is going to be very, very close because this was our mix. And I'll tap that on. And I was right, it's very, 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 very soft. So we'll get out a different color. I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber to this. You've got to be careful with burnt umber and light colors. I'm mixing this on my palette. They can tend to turn pink. So this is yellow enough that it's not going to be a problem. So I'm just sponge mixing it. And I don't care if that gets laid over exactly right, but I can kind of line it up. Press down your edges. And maybe I don't want all of this the same. Maybe I want it to fade out, so I won't press as much. Okay, take that out. See, now that's a little bit stronger, but that's okay. I'm just going to apply different levels of different parts of these scrolls to different parts of the piece. Okay, so I've got to scroll up there, looking at my pattern to kind of see where maybe I'll do some little stuff here. Okay. I'll go over, do a little bit on the edge. I'm not worrying about what colors, I'm not worrying about matching, I'm not worrying about what kind of stencil, any kind of stencil. Okay. Just so we have some stencil. So I'll stick this stencil out over the way. Okay, and now I want to do a little bit of a mushy, squishy kind of background. And so I'm going to get out a ginormous I'm going to get out a ginormous, extra large crescent stencil brush. And we use these brushes dry. So I've got my brush. You absolutely want it dry. You want a dry paper towel folded. I'm going to get a little bit of my burnt umber. And I want to just kind of wipe this around my edges. Just to kind of frame things, soften, tone things. We're going to do a couple of colors of this. Okay, so that's what I got so far. It's, you know, I want this to look, you know, really like you found it someplace and you couldn't go buy this at Nordstrom's. You know, I want it to look old world, like you took a trip to France and found it at a fantastic flea market. And it's a treasure. Totally need to sand more of the inside of this. The way that you can keep this raised stuff from happening on the inside of your cutouts, on anything that cuts across the grain, you'll get this. What you can do is you can seal it, and then after you seal it, you sand it, then you seal it one more time, sand it again, and then after you base coat, sand it, and then pretty much you'll have a handle on it. Just takes a little bit more work. don't want to cut the top from the bottom off too much, so, oops, I got a piece of fluff from my paper towel here. That could add to the technique, huh? So I don't want to cut this off and frame this whole thing in right there. I want it to join. Okay, when you run out, just reload your paint. Make sure you wipe it off on a paper towel nice and firmly. This is kind of maybe a dry antiquing step. Alright, now I'm going to dirty dip into this lighter color that was in our mix. And I'm going to kind of neutralize the paint in my brush, so I'm going to dip and then wipe again. And maybe one more time and I should be good. I don't want to get another brush out, and since this color is so close, I don't have to worry too much. And what I'm going to do with this is just soften and meld and dirty up my background because my brush was dirty. Okay, so that's just making things even worse, but better. Worse in a better way. How's that sound? And because I'm dirty in my brush, what's going to happen is it's going to change as I get up to the top area. I wouldn't light antique or do what I'm doing over this dark area right there. Keep it in the lighter areas. It just makes everybody own everybody else. Totally did that. You could go back in and do a little bit of brown in there, or maybe you like it toned like that. Okay. I'm liking that. It gives it a nice, oh, I don't know, something going on kind of background. Our next step is going to be to trace our pattern, and let's find out which side. I think that's the right side. I'm going to show you, this is a triple threat pencil. It has a chalk or ceramic lead sketching pencil. It has a gray one that does the same thing. So it erases with water. It erases with an eraser. It erases with varnish. How cool is that? But the third one that it has, let me get to it, is it has a rollerball tracer head without any ink. So, and a comfort grip, and I don't know about you, but I always death grip my styluses. So we'll lay our pattern on. Mine obviously looks a little bit different than yours will because mine is all sketchy. I sketch all my original designs on this yellow tracing paper because it's ultra see-through and I can layer things. So this is original pattern, and not clean pattern. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a sketch. With our grapes, go ahead and just sketch the outside lines of them so that you have just like general placement, because we'll just wash them all together and then transfer the lines after. All right, I've got just the basics of my pattern on, and there's two things that we can do to neutralize our paint colors to make them sit on our palette or on our project nicer. Because if I just use that pink plop right on there, that pink would be kind of obnoxious, and we don't want to have obnoxious projects. So we can do one of two things. We can either throw paint on the table, we can either neutralize it with our base color, which is down here in the antique white, or that's a part of the family of the base, or we can neutralize it with an umber, in this case because it's all over our project. This is going to be too dark for this step, and this is going to make that lighter, and so I think that's the direction I'm going to go. So we'll pull out our palette knife, and we'll neutralize that color until it's softer and sits nicely on our project. That's going to be like 1-to-1. Looks like that pink is a strong pink. Okay, I'm not even certain we're there yet. I'm going to put a touch of that umber in there, and maybe another touch. I want to deaden that color out because then I can use vibrant stuff later. So that's where we started, way over there, and this is what we've ended up with. We're going to do this with the leaf color as well. So we can make it vibrant wherever we want. You can't take vibrant back out very easily, so we'll start dull. And I'll also start with water. That's another neutralizer. So it's a whole neutralizing kind of project, right? So we're going to go into our water. We're going to make it maybe 50-50 water and paint in that dull area. I'm going to blot on my paper towel. Blotting makes it so that the paint will actually not puddle around. Now these grapes over here that are sitting underneath this down leaf, this down left corner, this needs to be sheer because these are not the center of attention. Okay, I'm going to just ignore the fact that I have a big chip sitting in the middle of that. I may have to paint that, I'm not sure I'm going to care. Okay, so see how that is so very toned. Almost like a ghost bunch of grapes. And you know what? This one up here is so ghosty, I don't even have a pattern on. Okay, I've got my pattern on, then our paint, blot on the paper towel. I'm going to paint these upside right so that I make sure that they're formed correctly. I've got mine fairly loose, and I just want to make sure that I don't do silly things. I'll let that leaf sit over the top of these, I think. The fun part about designing, and I encourage all of you to give it a try, even if you can't draw, you know, this bunch of grapes is simply a bunch of circles. You know, so if you have design ideas, give it a shot. You might be really surprised. Okay, so I'm just going to fill in a basic little body of color there. Alright, and then maybe that gives us our 3 bunches of grapes. Now I'm going to go into, it's going to be a wash, the less muted color. I'm going to give these guys back here now. Oops, a little bit more washy. And that will stand out like a sore thumb, so I'm just going to wipe that back. I'm going to give these back here. Because I want this to be a soft project, I'm not certain that my vines aren't going to be washy too, so I'll make sure that I give myself the option of having them be transparent and not base coat through them. So just bring that out to the lines. Some pretty darkish lines going on here. If that freaks you out, the time to erase or soften them is right now, because you don't want them stuck on your piece. Always make sure that you allow your paint to dry before you transfer on a pattern. This is a pretty groovy little eraser. This one comes in a triangular shape. And that means that, so I don't know if you can see that shape, but that means that it has corners. It has 3 corners on it, and that means you can get exactly on the line where you want it. If you've got an erasing point right in the middle of something, you can get at it. Also, if you dip it in water and erase, it will take your fresh paint off, but it doesn't hurt dry paint. Okay, so we want to keep our, so I stalled, right? And I've got this where dry meets wet. One of the things when you're washing on colors is you don't want dry to meet wet. You want to keep everything wet and moving. In this case, I'm going to be putting so much other stuff on top of it, I don't think I'm going to worry about it, but it definitely does leave a pronounced line. So work wet and wet while you are washing on color. And maybe I'll come back up here and darken this just a little bit. Make sure I do it randomly so it doesn't look too contrived. Okay, for our green, we're going to do the same step. We're going to put in, I've got just a little touch of pink in there, that's not going to hurt anything. Your palette should kind of be like a living, breathing organism. I'll put out fresh just so I don't freak anybody out. But don't be, if you're painting with all these colors, don't be afraid to let that little bit of pink touch that green, because for the most part, generally speaking, that will make your project more cohesive and have a stronger color family. So don't be afraid to let your food touch each other, if you were. Okay, now that brightened my green, which is the wrong direction that I want, but it also lightened it and made it more of a value that's closer to my background, which I did want. So that's when we'll go into the brown and tone down. Okay, now we've got a green that's toned. Here's what we've got. We've got a green that's original, we've got a green that's toned with the creamy color, and we've got a green that's toned with both. Okay, and so by not mixing all of the palette and mixing it down in a cascading form, then that means I can go into this color, and that color, and have my options on my palette open. So I'll get the same washing brush, and we'll wash out our green. We'll see how this sits on the palette before we decide where to put it. I'm going to start in my middle area because I sense that this will be the right color for that. Okay. You have to decide who your star soprano singer is going to be. Is it going to be the surface? I'm going to need to get a flat brush. Is it going to be the surface, be the star? Is it going to be the grapes? Is it going to be the leaves? Is it going to be, the entire thing as a joint unit, which is harder to pull off. It's easier if you have centers of attention and things like that. But make that decision. That way you're always working towards your goal. Alright, so the reason I switched to the flat is because I can take that chisel edge and run it right into the corners or the sharp edges of the leaves. The reason I used a filbert on the grapes is because of the rounded shape, and it prevents edges. You do not want grapes with sharp chisel edges in them. Okay, so that leaf is sitting behind. And so see how that's just a lovely little family there. It's just a tone on tone kind of thing going on. I'll keep that going. This other green that I mixed is going to be so much brighter. So I think I am going to need to stay just in this family for my base coats. Now, what happens? You may be saying, oh, I'm going over my stencil lines and I can still see my stencil lines through my grape leaves. But we don't care, because that's just going to add to the depth of the piece. This is a style of painting called loose, and sometimes it messes with your brain, but the overall effect is so pleasing. Give yourself permission to kind of be a scribbler with this. No anal painters in the room, okay? Now another way that you could tone this green color, if you wanted to, is you could go into, ooh, that's just strong, strong, strong. I don't have enough water in my paint. Is you could go into your pink, and you could pink and green them together and just go across. Basically it's using your direct complement as your toner, and that is another very fine way of toning. Every now and again I get to painting and I forget to talk. I apologize. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I try not to bore you with details that you don't need to see. But I think we're going to go ahead and use the same color for all the leaves, the same spot on our color mix. So go ahead and base coat the rest of them. Alright, as soon as my paint colors are dry, you can heat it at this time because you've got your wax and everything all done. Then you can trace on your pattern for your leaves. I think leave the leaf lines off, do the grape circles. And one other thing I think that is going to bug me just a little bit is my tone for this background color is very, very, very dark compared to how washy I'm getting with my projects. So I'm going to go into my the burnt umber and the other color, I'm just going to tone that down just a little bit through the body of my cracks, my chips. Just sink them back just a hair. The contrast is real high. I think I will end up getting into a place where I have more contrast, but I'm thinking right now, yeah, I think that could be, let's see how much gentler that is rather than polka dots up here. So I think we can like that. Just a little bit toned back. Love paint because you can always go back and adapt and alter. I'm just rubbing some colors in there. Okay, the trick with grapes is some get shaded on and some get shaded under. And which one is which just depends on whether they're in the center of interest. I'm going to use the pink mix because I'm going to use that middle pink mix because it'll be stronger. I'm going to go ahead and just start giving some definition to my grapes. I'm going to decide who gets interest and who doesn't get interest. Okay, that's the very first thing I'll do. I'll just cinch on in here so you can see. Whoops. Sorry about that. This is just going to kind of give me a little bit more depth to my grapes. I'm kind of going for those ones that are going to be really showing. It's just an easy little C-stroke. C-stroke has your brush locked. You don't have to turn your brush, you're locking it and pulling your hand. Okay. I'll look and see, do I like that pattern? Just kind of squint my eyes at it. Maybe I need a little bit more here and there. Maybe that one needs to not be. Okay, so I kind of am liking that. Now I'm going to go into Antique Maroon, and this is going to appear like a very dark color because it is a very dark color. And what I'm going to do is shade next to the grapes that I made into top grapes. It's a nice little C-stroke with a nice controlled float and enough water. Yep. If you don't have enough water, it won't close up that edge, and I need that right on that edge. Always use your fingers to blot. You have varying darknesses. If you use your fingers to blot, make sure that you wash them before you do any kind of rubbing technique or something like that, because they'll leave fingerprints all over things. Okay, so that starts making some of the grapes pop up a little bit. Just keep working our way through the grapes. Grapes are so much fun. They're really a neat little project to do. Any little endy ends that we get, we'll just get rid of them. Now, one of the things, you saw me just now turn my project around, you've got to be able to see where you're going when you're floating. So it's really important that you're floating towards yourself, you know, so that you can see what where the edge is touching. So when you get ready to do the other side, just flip your project over. Oops. I blotted and messed that one up. Some of these are just like, we'll do those with a little bit of a round brush. Down over here. Oop. nobody told you guys this was finger painting. Okay. So that's where we are right now. I'm okay with that. So we'll come up here to these other, these are a looser style of a grape. So I'm just going to kind of look at my project, this little design technique moment. You will, of course, have a pattern. I'm going to look at my grape clusters and just decide by looking at them what I'm going to want as far as tops and bottom grapes. Okay, and then the same thing goes down here. So by using this water-soluble erasing pencil, what that does for me is it gives me the ability to sketch these lines on and know that I can get them off and they'll erase as I paint, which is fantastic. And that is a triple threat Ghost Rider. Is that right? Yeah, it's a triple threat Ghost Rider. We've got Ghost Riders in every color. A little hint is to get leads, get the refill leads in the different colors, and then put whatever color you want into the pencil, so that you have white and gray, or you have whatever color you know that you would use all the time. Okay, so we do the same techniques to the top and the bottom. We're always going to want these to be less of a moment than the one in the middle, if that is our center of interest. So we want to be careful not to let it take over the world. This just emphasizes the colors. Okay, and you can see that with the glare. Maybe one more. Okay. We'll get out our little bit of an old round brush, and we'll get some water and our, and what color is this? Antique Maroon. We're going to fill in some of these funny little back spots. And more water. And maybe just tone it with a touch of the burnt umber, just so it all goes together. Blot my brush. Funny little spots behind things that we don't need to work so hard to shade. Just follow your lines. Try not to get too precise. Precise is okay, but it has its moments when it's useful. And I don't have grapes in there, so I'm going to give myself some grapes. The most important thing when you're sketching on something is to go through your lines. So you might go all the way through and finish that, and then take your triple threat eraser and just erase it off. That way you're certain that your shapes are right. It messes up a lot of people's heads. You think you're drawing a circle, and really what you're doing is making it maybe a little messy. And all these little back holes. Same thing back up here. some nice shapes now. Much easier than floating everything. And lost that line right there. If you lose a line, don't be afraid to put it back in. Okay, so that's that guy. Who does he belong to? That's going to be something there. You don't want these little spaces to be too big, because the reason that they're there at all is because it shows that there's a grape behind there, but if the hole was bigger, then it would show grape. So you want to be careful not to make your voids, your shadowy, deep, dark places too much. Okay. By gum, I think we might have it. Okay, so now we'll go in and we'll just make corners of this be a little bit darker. I'm using straight, whatever this is, antique maroon. We'll just make some of these have little darker corners, and I'm scribbling with my brush. Oops, and blobbing on my paint. Especially the, where the grapes are really sitting high, or there's just a really little crevasse, those would be the darker ones. I'm not worried about blending that because I think it'll all come out in the wash as far as shadowy effect goes. Okay. We'll do the same thing. We're going to repeat those steps with these two pieces. Else. Okay, I've gone ahead and mixed my Napa red with half and half of my pink mix, and then I mixed in just a touch of my antique maroon. And I have a kind of an interesting color here. I'm not sure I'm going to like it. But we'll take a gander at it once we get it on there. I'm going to kind of wash over, do a kind of funny, get you a little bit closer, funny kind of a washy, reinforcey kind of a technique. I'm washing over the grapes, those ones that I made more obvious earlier. Okay, that gave me a form so I could see. This is going to give me some color. And I'm bringing it into the grape. I'm going across the grape. Not worrying about it being beautiful. I'm just kind of treating it as a wash. I don't want to be too messy. I don't want to be too neat either. And we can go and give hints of things to different other grapes. Maybe just a little kiss of color. Maybe some of these on the outside are just going to be lighter. So I like how the grapes are now coming off of the surface. They're starting to look like there's something going on. I'm going to go into a little bit of Napa. Let's see where we go with Napa. Let's see what's dry. Oops. And wet enough. Okay, so now we're really going to start popping things, right? Now this is a skinnier foot. I'm not pulling this into the piece. Those main ones, that little bit of electricity. Now I'm going to go into the Antique Maroon, and I'm going to do that same thing with the other grapes. So I'm going to bring this across the grape that isn't as bright, in a kind of a washy kind of an effect, because this color is more toned. It's still in the color family. You don't want to make them as dark as that dark shading that you did. And this whole area seems like it just needs a wash. Okay, that's making everybody be a little bit more family. Next, I'm going to take my dry brush, and I am going to load it dry. Many of you have seen my dry brush video, and I load it real juicy, but in this case, I want to create a fairly dry environment. Flick on my paper towel. And I want to create a kind of a higher spot on a couple of these little grapey poos. A little bit of yellow. Going on the opposite side as my floated color. Do some of the dark ones too, some of the darker brown ones. I'm just really kind of scratching on some color. Don't want to create holes. No holes. If you get too light on a dark piece, then what you create is a hole. You don't want that. Shape this grape and have him go out the other way. Okay, I'm going to use my flattened, dried out, kind of fuzzy round, use an old one, and I'm going to put sparkles, not too bright, that one just kind of scares me, on our more upward pointing grapes. Within that area that we just rubbed. And now they can have different ones, either the antique white or the bleached sand. Can have different sparkles. Sometimes around the bottom. Different levels of brightness. I'm not going to pretend that I'm a grape anthropologist or something. I'm just making art and I'm enjoying it. So it doesn't matter if I'm right, it just matters whether or not we like what I'm doing. So make sure when you're doing your project, anybody can study a grape, but are you making art when you're doing it? Okay. Now I think I want to do a little bit of a washy kind of an effect. I'm going to go Napa and Antique Maroon, and I'm going to wash over this lower quadrant of grapes as a body. I want that to have just a little bit more hanging mass. Now I think I'll go just Antique Maroon. And maybe deepen it down there. Yeah, like that. But now see how that left these guys down here just a little bit behind. That's so strong, that's so weak. So just a little bit on one side, only with Antique Maroon. Just going to give that, just I want it to tell the story along with, okay, but I don't want real strong color. The same thing up here. We can't have this one being lost where it's not connected. So this one will wash with Antique Maroon and Napa mix to one side, bringing it down. What I'm attempting to do, as you're looking, let's back off just a little, back off a little bit. Okay, what I'm attempting to do is I'm attempting to guide the eye. I'm attempting to bring that eye in and around. Okay, so, and I'm going to bring in some pinks and some things once I do my leaves as well to connect everything. Okay, so that's the goal. We'll see if we can achieve it. Okay, next we'll move on to our leaves. Okay, I'm using a couple of different sizes of scumblers. These are bristle scumblers. These are going to be used as dry rubbing brushes, and I love them because they have a really small, little tiny head on them. We're going to use dry brushes, dry paper towel. I'm going to pick up my avocado green. Is it light avocado? And I'm going to start dry rubbing around. See how I need this control right around these grapes. Now, do I think, and I think I do, I think that that color is coming off just a little bit too brilliant in hue. So we'll take our palette knife to both of these, and we'll put some umber in them both. These are DecoArt colors. Okay, remember we're not concerned about touching each other on this palette. There's none of that stuff like with your kids. Mom, he's looking at me. Okay, in this case, they're friends, they're pals, and the more they share stuff, the more pal-like they are. So we like our palette to be pals, right? Okay, so that'll be just a little bit more toned. By scumbling on these colors, I can shade in a non-shape forming kind of way. I can just give the general area a depth, and then what I'll do is I'll float right next to that, and that will give me the look that I need. Okay, now I want to be careful not to get too crazy. I don't want it to get too dark because then we'll lose our leaves. So we need to darken it a little bit because you can't hardly see them. All right. The leaves are going to be all the same. I'm going to show you these center ones just because I know that sometimes it'll be like, wait, I didn't see it all. I once bought a video about leaves, and the person showed 3 of them, and like left all the others out, so they always been like give you more information. You can always fast forward that little toggle thing on the screen. Just drag that along and get rid of the parts you don't want to see. Okay, so we want to deepen them so that they're darker underneath the grapes. Okay, and then we're going to deepen them again. And we don't want any sudden stops and starts, so as your paint is fading off of your paintbrush, just keep rubbing it out into your piece. If you get a big blob, use some spit and get it off of there. But always dry on your paper towel. A little bit of time spent there is good. It almost wants to look like there's not much of anything on your brush at all. I'm going to deepen this. I don't think I've got enough. I know I'm going to deepen it later, but okay, get it nice and deep. At this point, I think I'm going to let you check it out on your own. I'll be back for the next step. Okay, so the next step we're going to do is we're going to go ahead. I'm trying to decide if I want to float that. I probably ought to go ahead. I'm going to lay my brush down and hope I don't forget it, but if I do, I can use my terrific, wonderful brush cleaner, the, what's it called? Winsor Newton brush cleaner, which will take dry paint off anything. Keep it away from plastics though, because it likes plastics. It likes to eat plastic. Okay, what I want to do is float this color while I have it out and it's fresh and yada yada around and suck that color up next to that leaf. And that'll crisp up my edges. Yeah, then my dry rubbing doesn't really show, which we like. Just kind of connects everything. Then I'm going to have that, see how there's like a halo of light right next to my leaf. Don't want that. Alright, now I'm going to repeat with this dark mix and my kind of dry, scumbly brush. The project has to be dry, otherwise you're not going to get the look you want. These brushes are very affordable, and like as you saw with this circumstance where I needed to set my brush aside for a minute and I can't use it wet, make sure you just buy a couple of them. That way you have them. They're just cheap, 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 and they're handy, handy, handy. And I'm not telling you to go buy them from me. Wherever you want to buy them from, that's fine. Just it just makes sense. I almost always try to just give you advice that that I would actually take myself, you know, or would want to know about. So, you know, whatever you want to do, I'm the advisor, and you guys can decide what you want to do from there. Okay, so just deepening this color. Any little dry gunks that you get off of there, or bristles or anything like that, just wipe them off. Okay, see how nice that fades that color out? It's just important that we just extend that color out just a little bit more. I think I forgot a floating stick down here. And as my paint fades, I just walk that brush into brush towards where I want, into the rest of the leaf, sorry. And that just makes everything kind of belong together a little bit better. Okay, now we're going to float in different areas of the leaves. I'm going to go ahead and load the dark mix. Alright, so we've got that green over here, so now I want to bring a float of that over along here, up here. Start thinking about where your eye is going to be going. Whether or not you've got these divisions, would it be a good place to break right here on the edge? Maybe not, so maybe I want to go ahead and make that be a consistent line. Okay. Are my grapes taking over are my leaves taking over my grapes? Do I like what I'm doing? You know, ask yourself these questions. I don't want them outlined everywhere, but I don't want stuff to feel lonely either. So we'll come down here. Give it some accents. Ooh, watch your hand running through the other grapes, or the other leaves. Squint at your project from time to time. That helps tremendously. Helps you see stuff you can't see, like you're not using your brain when you're squinting or something. You know, it shows you stuff that is just like the lights and the darks instead of like, oh, pretty grapes. So I don't want those outlined. Now we got to be careful down here because guess what? This is going to take us right off of the piece if we're not real careful. So we want that line to be real soft. Here's what gives interest. Lots of line, so we've got lots of circles right here. Okay, that gives a lot of interest. Contrast. If this was very dark and this was very light, contrast would drag my eye. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to scumble these little guys down here so that the contrast wouldn't be as high, because it'll just like, there goes your eye. Let's see. Let's see your tangents. I'm trying to think of what else right down here on the spot. But what I do know is on this project, two things. Contrast, value change, so brightness. So we've got some of that bright pink. Lots of lines. So our grapes are gathering attention just because of all the lines that there are on them. Okay, let's take a look and see what we got going on. Okay, now we need to get some veiny vine thingies going. Okay, so we need to have our vines. They're going to be a green, a medium green, oops, with water. Bring them on in, washing, floating them down. Okay, we've got all kinds of vines on this thing. Okay, then let's see, this comes out over here. Tell a story with your vines. Okay. Don't forget your vines have to be heavy enough to be able to support what it is you've got going on there. Alright, so now that we've got those on there, now we need to shade. And I know you're probably thinking, like, are you crazy? But we do need a little bit of shading on those vines. So let's zoom in and let's see what we can do about that. We can do one of two things. We could float really, really tiny, or we can take a liner brush. I'm going to use the Raphael in this case. Raphael is an amazing brush. It's like a centuries-old liner brush that's made in France, hand-tied, but it comes to such a sharp point. Okay, I'm loading it with water and paint. See if this mix is dark enough. Okay, we got you in close enough to see. So what I want to do is I just want to line kind of almost like a heavy line, but I want to be able to control it. Okay, that's going to give us the illusion of, oops, of shading. And then we'll go in and highlight that as well. Just when you didn't think I could get crazier. So I'll do a little skip shadow effect. Okay, up here at the top. Let's see if I can get you on camera. Ah. Now we'll use the same brush and we'll load it in the antique white. Let's see if that's going to be bright enough. Yeah, that's bright enough. And then we'll just fill in just a little bit. We don't want to cover everything up, so it's almost like a skip. I'm going to alternate between the antique white and the bleached sand. Just got a little skip highlight. Not everywhere. And you want to kind of alternate thick, thin with the lining strokes as well, because you don't want it to look like, oh yeah, hey, look, I lined and I lined. That's not as appealing as it could be. Okay, now we need to do our vines. Not our vines, our leaf veins. Here's where, this is time for a Patty lecture, which I hate people who lecture, so maybe it's not, we won't call it a lecture. I see more people wreck more leaves with unthought ahead lining. So either transfer the lines, which I hate also because it just takes so much time, or sketch them on with a pencil that will erase. So we want to follow the shapes of the leaf that we have drawn. Okay, and so we're not going to do them this stiff, but we want to give ourselves guidelines. We want to have them bending with our leaf. This big hummer right here would be easily wrecked if it didn't have guidelines. And now these just come right off with water, you know, spit, saliva, whatever. It is an invaluable tool. This is what this tool is brilliant at. All right, so we are going to get into the, we're going to use the dark color, but we're going to use it with water. Okay, go on, let's get you on here. Now what I want to do is, as I'm bringing my leaf vein down, I want to kind of spin my wheels or spin my brush in my finger, and I want my brush to dance down to the end without, not to the end, but I want it to fade out. Okay. But by giving it a little bit of a wiggle, it doesn't look so stiff. And then you can have some other things coming out. Remember, lines make the attention, so if you don't intend for this leaf to have a hog share of the attention, then don't put too many leaves, too many veins. And don't get too wiggly. Now maybe up here next to this lovely bunch of grapes, maybe I can have a little bit more darker detail, a little bit more detail. Maybe start branching them off to the end. Same thing here. This is a pretty important leaf up here. It's going to be thicker because it's a heavier leaf, right? Okay, so we'll fade out. I'll start doing some of this little branchy stuff. This is where we're using just ever so light pressure on the tip of this brush. This brush will make great big ginormous strokes, and it'll do great big fine wonderful work. Get you on camera. Okay, loving the leaves. Coming out just how I wanted them. So I'm going to keep that detail to a minimum. And soft. Alright, the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to take my great big round or oval glaze brush, and I'm going to side load it in Antique Maroon, and I'm just going to go a little bit around my edges. I guess if you could see it, that'd be better. Not all the edges. Just maybe the framing edges. Maybe have just a little bit of that pink color into my piece. And come way up here, do the same thing up top. Flip it down the side. Okay. And then we want to give a little bit of pink. This is where we start walking colors around. So this is just, you know, you want to kiss a little bit of this on this and touch a little bit of this over here. I'm going into Antique Maroon, and where maybe I want the eye to carry down a little bit down to this next batch of grapes. Maybe I'm going to tint this leaf in with a little bit of the maroon color. Just give it a little bit of something. This one over here, same thing. Bring that down. Things next to things also are a good reason to, like almost like they're reflecting on things. Don't get carried away though, don't do too much. So up here we need just a little bit of this color to walk us down into. We can even tint a little bit of this grapevine. Maybe bring a little bit more. Okay, now I think, let's do, oops, I just splashed all my water. I have way too much water in there. Just poured it all over my table. Okay, I think let's go into the lighter green, if I can find a spot to blend. Side loading. And then let's bring a little bit of that green into our piece as well. Maybe across the bottom. Definitely at the top. Okay, yeah, I like just a little bit of that here and there. Now as far as my edges go, I haven't got my edges done yet. I think I'm going to go with a blah, 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 blah mixture. Okay, so that's going to be like a whatever you want to make out of it kind of thing. So I'm going to get into a little umber because we're definitely going to want it toned. Going to have a little bit of blue, going to have a little bit of my light. Not blue. I don't know what color blue is. And just give it a toned kind of edge that isn't really a color. Almost like it could be antiqued or something. And I'm going to use my paper towel and rub it down. Okay, so I just want it to be a muted something there to finish off border color. Okay. Alright, in retrospect, as I took it and got some distance from it, I think that this leaf looks awfully misshapen because it goes over the hill and it goes behind here. So I'm going to make this leaf come over and above. I can't see the reasoning behind painting something 2 times to film it, so sometimes you get to see all kinds of interesting outtakes. So I'm just going to bring this leaf up and over. I'll let that dry. Bring some of that dark in. Maybe over here as well. Okay, now it doesn't look as misshapen as it did before. I'm going to have to give it one more. Sketch it in there so it has just a little bit more interest.